Marvel and DC, Peter Parker's brother becomes the strongest hero across the multiverse. Like, share and subscribe. Episode 21, Abuse. Looking at Gwen standing in front of him and Peter getting up again, Thompson sneered. Haha, Luya, why don't you like to stand out? What, are you going to hide behind your brother and the girl now? Thompson's tone was extremely sarcastic, bringing the villain's triumphant expression to the extreme. Luya's heart was not disturbed now. As long as his family was not involved, the gods would not bother to care about the provocation of the ants. It was Thompson's words that angered Gwen and Peter at the same time. Peter suddenly possessed extraordinary power, and he had a righteous heart. He would even help passers-by when they were bullied, let alone his own brother. In Gwen's eyes, Luya is undoubtedly a superhero. After witnessing Luya's great power in Hell's Kitchen, now even if she has gained extraordinary power, she understands that she is completely inferior to Luya. The surroundings seemed to be quiet for a moment, and the voices of nearby discussions seemed to be pulled far away. Then, as if they had agreed, Peter and Gwen rushed towards Thompson at the same time. Thompson was completely unafraid and turned around to fight 1 against 2. Luya watched the movements of the 3 people carefully and quickly analyzed them in his brain. First of all, Thompson is undoubtedly the strongest, and is much stronger than his younger brothers Peter and Gwen. Next, Peter's strength is second, while Gwen's strength is the weakest. Of course, the weakness here is relatively speaking. In fact, although the movements of the 3 are not gorgeous at present, even Gwen, who is the weakest, is definitely more than a ton in the eyes of Luya. This is the reason why the 3 of them have just awakened. As time goes by, the power of the 3 of them will continue to grow. While Luya was thinking, the 3 people in front were already fighting. Peter hugged Thompson, trying to restrict his movements. Although Gwen kicked Thompson just now, his attention was all on his brother Luya, so he didn't know about Gwen's changes, and thought she just succeeded when Thompson wasn't paying attention. Therefore, after hugging Thompson, Peter shouted loudly, "He is not something you can deal with, leave now." One is his brother, and the other is the sister-in-law in his heart. Yes, Peter saw that Gwen's relationship with his brother was unusual, so he took the initiative to regard her as his brother Luya's girlfriend. In this way, he will not allow anyone to get hurt. But Gwen didn't care so much. She also wanted Luya to see that she also had extraordinary abilities. I can become a superhero like him in the future. However, the chosen spider strengthened Thompson beyond their imagination. Almost effortlessly, Thompson hooked the shoulder of Peter who was hugging him with one hand, and grabbed Gwen's fist attacking him with the other hand. Boom! Thompson stood on his feet and used his arms. Drink! With the huge force coming, both Peter and Gwen couldn't control their bodies and were thrown away by Thompson. After landing, Peter glanced at his brother Luya reluctantly, and then looked at Mary Jane. Seeing Mary Jane looking at him worriedly, Peter's thoughts suddenly drifted far away. Does she care about me? Yes, she just cares about me. Somehow, Peter felt a little secretly happy in his heart. All around, students were talking a lot. Oh my God, is Thompson so strong? I can only say that he is indeed the star of our school football team. Hey! Is now the time to talk about this? Hurry up and find the teacher. Others couldn't see the changes in the 3 of them, but they could still tell that Thompson was beating and bullying his classmates. Therefore, several students quietly left the crowd of onlookers and ran towards the office. Luya saw the changes in the crowd and knew that soon a teacher would come to stop this farce. Therefore, Luya no longer waits. How about that, puny Peter, huh? At this time, Thompson grabbed Peter's collar and still yelled with the nickname he had given Peter before. Gwen stabilized her figure at this time and raised her legs to continue moving forward. Well, his power is much stronger than yours now, and it's not something you can handle now. This farce should come to an end. After patting Gwen's head gently, Luya moved his legs, reached behind Thompson in an instant, and grasped the raised fist. What's going on, am I dazzled? The students around him rubbed their eyes. How did the lore move behind Thompson in such a sudden motion? At this time, Thompson was raising his fist, wanting to punch Peter in the face, but as soon as he raised his fist, he felt his wrist being held. Thompson turned around suddenly and found that it was Luya who had thrown himself into a trap. His brain, which was filled with muscles, did not think much, but laughed innocently. Luya, you actually delivered it to your door yourself? Then you can't blame me. After that, in Peter's horrified eyes, Thompson let go of him with his other hand and punched the lure in the face. No. Peter already knows about Thompson's power, and even his own extraordinary strength is a bit unbearable. So as an ordinary brother, isn't it dangerous? However, Thompson punched so fast that Peter could only widen his eyes in despair. However, Thompson was still not completely crazy. Halfway through his fist swing, he reluctantly withdrew some of his strength. He just wanted to teach Luya a lesson, but he didn't really want to kill anyone. As everyone knows, it was his last move that made Luya let him go. Just as his fist was about to hit Lua's face. Boom. As everyone imagined, the scene where Luya was smashed in the face did not appear. Instead, it was Thompson. At this time, both of his wrists were held by Luya. What? Thompson looked at his restricted hands in disbelief. He tried hard to pull them out, but he couldn't do it. Luya's hands were like two iron hoops, tightly locking his wrists. How is this possible? Even Peter was stunned. He was the one who knew Thompson's power best. It is no exaggeration to say that Thompson now looks like a very destructive violent bear. And in this state, Thompson's hands were easily restrained by his brother? Looking at Thompson, who was still struggling in disbelief, Luya smiled slightly and exerted force with his palms at the same time. Click. Ah. Thompson looked at Luya in horror and pain. He felt as if his wrist was broken. What kind of monster is this? It's obvious that my body's strength is comparable to steel. But in fact, Luya controls his power very well. As a reward for Thompson's strength just now, he just crushed Thompson's wrist into bone fractures instead of powder. Episode 22, Thompson lost confidence and his ability deteriorated. Thompson clearly felt that his wrist was clamped by an iron vise. No. With his current strength and physical strength, it is impossible for iron pliers to restrain him. Just this morning, Thompson, who had gained extraordinary strength, was still in high spirits, thinking that the whole world was at his feet. He was originally a flamboyant person, but once he gained such ability, he immediately drifted away. Until facing Luya, his self-confidence was shattered again. Like a magic spell, although Thompson still looked at Luya with an unconvinced expression, fear already appeared in his heart. Moreover, as time went by and with the guidance of the classmates around him, his inner fear continued to rise. Peter finally breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that Thompson was really completely restrained by his brother Luya. He didn't understand why Thompson suddenly became so powerful like him. Maybe he was bitten by a spider like him? In that case, does it mean that my brother was bitten by a spider in the laboratory that day? But Peter is quite happy that Thompson can defeat him. He had been bullied by him for so long and even became the laughingstock of his classmates. He knew all this. Although with the presence of Luya, many students did not laugh at Peter in person, but their sensitive hearts could still tell that many students looked down upon them. Peter glanced at his brother Luya. I want to become as powerful as him one day. At this time, Peter still didn't know how outrageous his wish was. The strength of Luya was not just what he showed on the surface. Thompson, don't you have anything to say about today's events? Luya let go of Thompson's injured hand. Fearing Luya's power, Thompson made no other moves this time. But the team won't lose even if they lose, so Thompson wanted to say 2 more harsh words. But when he raised his head and looked into Luya's eyes, he flinched. The absolute suppression of Luya's power gave him a psychological shadow. People like him can easily bully the weak and fear the strong. He was afraid, he was really afraid. So Thompson spoke with difficulty, feel sorry. When he said these 2 words, it meant that his pride and his stubbornness were thrown to the ground. The students around were talking a lot. The school's rugby star, Lightning, who had always been a domineering image, actually bowed his head. However, he had to do this. Thompson looked into Luya's eyes, what a pair of terrifying eyes they were, and the murderous intent seemed to have turned into reality. If Luya hadn't gone to school on time every day, Thompson would have thought Luya was a murderous supervillain. Faced with Thompson's submission, Luya smiled again and patted his shoulder gently. If you know your mistakes and can correct them, you will still be a good kid. Unlocking degree of Motherland template increased by 3%. Unlocking degree of Motherland template 50%. The system that had been hunting in Hell's Kitchen a few days ago and had no movement for a long time actually gave a report at this time. Luya seems to have understood something. Maybe the unknown person can no longer provide himself with unlocking speed? This is the only possibility. Thompson is still a famous figure in the Marvel Universe. As the Motherland template unlocked and exceeded 50, Luya immediately felt the huge amounts of changes. Unlike before, his strength steadily increased with the unlocking level. This time, he could clearly feel that his strength seemed to have doubled. Even his body seems to have become much lighter. This is the discomfort caused by the extremely rapid increase in strength, but Luya believes that he will adapt to it soon. As for Thompson, who was half lying on the ground, he felt a sudden burst of strong momentum from the Luya in front of him. Is he going to attack me? With this kind of momentum, does he want to kill me? Peter and Gwen also discovered the abnormality of the lure's momentum through the spider sense. Peter didn't have any idea, he just thought his brother was putting pressure on Thompson. But Gwen knew that Luya was a Superman whose eyes could emit laser light. Is Luya stronger again? If this continues, will one day he become a godlike existence? Gwen doesn't know, but she's looking forward to this day. At this time, under the heavy pressure, Thompson was sweating profusely. He didn't even dare to wipe the sweat drops on his forehead for fear that it would attract Luya's attention. What he didn't know was that as his mentality changed, he became afraid of the strong and deeply doubtful of himself. The tiny spider hairs on Thompson's body are slowly retreating, and his bulging muscles are also beginning to shrink at an extremely slow speed. But his attention was all on Luya, and he didn't notice any changes in himself. On the other hand, for Luya, the further unlocking of the Motherland template has greatly enhanced his vision. Therefore, Luya noticed something was wrong with Thompson. His ability is slowly deteriorating? Luya remembered that in the previous movie, Peter Parker seemed to have experienced a similar situation. At that time, it seemed that Peter's emotional frustration, coupled with the wavering of faith in his heart, led to the disappearance of his ability. That's fine. If someone like Thompson gains such ability, he might become Spider-Man or a spider monster. In the distance, the Dean is approaching. Luya glanced at Thompson again, shook his head, and turned to leave. It is impossible for him to really kill Thompson and expose his ability. There are many big bosses in the Marvel world, and although Luya is not afraid of most of them, there are a few that he needs to pay attention to at this stage. Such as the Ancient One, the Sorcerer Supreme. This is a hurdle that cannot be bypassed. If it caught her attention, then I would be at the mercy of others, with my extremely poor magic resistance. So, before the Dean arrived, Luya left the corridor. Gwen jumped and followed, seemingly ignoring the surprised looks of others. Peter looked at the lost Thompson, and then at Mary Jane. Mary Jane stood in front of Peter just now, which moved Peter so much that he felt that Mary Jane was the woman he wanted to protect throughout his life. However, when Peter looked at Mary Jane, Jane stared blankly at Luya and Gwen, who were leaving together. In her eyes, the loss could not be concealed. It's tragic to say that she became Thompson's girlfriend, but Thompson was a jerk in high school. Moreover, Luya was suppressed several times when he provoked him, and he was even injured this time. He is liked by Peter, but Peter is very weak. Although he tried hard today, he was still beaten to the point of being confused by Thompson. Mary Jane really wants a sense of security, but who can give her this sense of security? Peter, Mary. Are you okay? Suddenly, a magnetic voice sounded behind the two of them. Episode 23, Venom appears. At night, the distraught Thompson returned home in a daze. Lying in bed, he couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Luya's glowing red eyes seemed to be flashing in front of him all the time. Gradually, Luya's handsome face seemed to appear in front of Thompson. Trash, you are just a trash. You are just a joker, ha ha ha. No. Get away. Thompson was so frightened that he roared and waved his arms crazily towards the nothingness in front of him. Bang. Without noticing, Thompson's hand fell on the cabinet next to him. The sharp corner of the cabinet instantly cut his arm open, and bright red blood began to drip down his arm. Tick-tock. 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 Facing the arm that continued to bleed, Thompson not only failed to stop the bleeding, but stared blankly at the wound. How is this possible, my arm? How could a mere wooden cabinet injure yourself? At this time, Thompson had noticed something was wrong with his body. The tiny fuzz and barbs on his body had completely disappeared. My figure has also shrunk a lot, and I'm back to where I was before I got my ability. In other words, his ability seems to have completely disappeared. No. No. Thompson murmured. If it had never been obtained, then Thompson might not care so much. However, now even insignificant Peter has gained this ability. Once he loses his ability, doesn't it mean that he will be bullied by Peter in the future? Just as Thompson was sitting on the edge of the bed in despair, he didn't notice that a group of black liquid quietly appeared outside the window. Feeling Thompson's extreme emotional changes, the black shadow seemed to smell something exciting and crawled towards Thompson quickly. Snap. The black liquid crawled onto Thompson's back, and a small tentacle stretched out, followed by a second, then a third. Countless tentacles were weaving behind Thompson's back like a big web. The next moment, all the tentacles suddenly stabbed Thompson. And these tentacles were integrated into Thompson's body the moment they came into contact with him. What the hell? At this time, Thompson also discovered the black liquid, and watched it continue to integrate into his body, and he continued to struggle. However, having lost his spider strength, he has no power to fight back in front of Venom. Yes, the black liquid is a symbiote Venom. At this time, Venom is looking for a symbiote that suits him. It came to Earth with a meteor, to the New York suburbs of America. It has been looking for a symbiote candidate for itself for a long time. Originally, his first choice was Luya, with his strong body, huge amounts of power, and decisive character. This is simply the perfect host tailor-made for you. If it can form a Venom symbiote with such a powerful host, it is even confident that they can join forces to rule the world. However, while Venom discovered that Luya was powerful, he also felt that Luya's soul ability was quite powerful. This may be the reason for the Lua crossing, but for Venom, this is not a good thing. It is willing to become a symbiosis with humans, but if the human soul's ability is too strong, or in other words, its willpower is too strong, then it may not be able to become the leader of the symbiosis. So Venom changed his target, and Peter was the second one to come into his sight. Although Peter is still far behind in lures after obtaining spider strength, it is still pretty good compared to ordinary humans. The only flaw is that Venom can feel that Peter is too kind at heart and has too low desires. This is actually the case. In the original movie, Peter's temperament changed drastically after he was possessed by Venom. The most pretentious thing he thought of was to buy discounted brand-name clothes. He didn't even rob it, he bought it with money. Now, Venom has finally made up his mind to choose Thompson, the B******************************************************** as the symbiote host. Get out of my body. Thompson saw that these black tentacles were about to be completely integrated into his body, and he was extremely frightened. But his struggle was completely meaningless. As the last tentacle disappeared, the Venom symbiote was born. Thompson touched his body with trembling hands, trying to find any abnormalities. At this time, a large amount of black liquid suddenly poured out of his body, and in a very short time, the Venom completed its possession. There was nothing wrong with being possessed by Venom, so Thompson calmed down for the time being. And on the contrary, he felt the return of power. No, this power is stronger than my previous spider strength. Thompson, who was covered in venom, had a big gash on his face and revealed a ferocious smile. Bliss. At this moment, the confidence that had been lost returned to Thompson's body again. Coming to the mirror, Thompson looked at himself inside. The whole body turned into black muscles, the body expanded in a large circle, and there seemed to be infinite power surging inside the body. This feeling is so wonderful. Thompson's eyes gradually became lost and then crazy. Those who cannot control power will be swallowed up by it. Gulu. So hungry. Venom. Thompson clutched his belly. Since this venom came to the earth, it has not had time to eat. Therefore, after living in Thompson's body, he was actually very weak. Thompson came to the window and looked at the pedestrians on the roadside. He swallowed hard. Good food, hee hee, bang. The door opened and closed, and Thompson, who had returned to normal, staggered out of the door. In the dark street, Ben Parker walked quickly along the street. As he walked, he looked around carefully. Tonight, my nephew Peter suddenly said he wanted to go out for a walk, but he still hasn't come home yet. I wanted to ask my son Luya about the situation, but when I opened the door and walked in, Luya was not in the room either. These two brats, after I find them, I must talk to them. At this time, Peter was standing at the door of a boxing ring, wearing a spider suit tailored by himself. Of course, this battle suit is still very rough. It is more like a coat with spider stripes than a battle suit. Looking at the address on the newspaper in his hand, Peter raised his head and looked at the entrance of the boxing ring with eyes full of yearning. 3,000 yuan for a game, if only for a few games, I would be a rich man. I want to become rich. I want to become rich. If he becomes rich, then Mary Jane will definitely agree to be with him. As long as there is money. As long as you have money. Episode 24, Changed History. Peter finally embarked on a path to make money. And the reason for all this is because of his good brother, Harry Osborn. Just this afternoon, when Peter wanted to take Mary Jane away, Mary Jane got into her friend Harry's car. The naive Peter thought that as long as he had money, Mary Jane would definitely be with him. Just like when he envied his brother Luya's strength before. The Marvel world seems to have really concluded its timeline. Just like in the movie, Peter won the game with difficulty, but only got a mere 50 yuan. At the same time, the masked robber who shot Ben Parker in the original film also appeared. When passing by Peter, Peter got out of the way like in the movie and did not stop him. Thank you, good brother. With that said, the masked man grabbed a handful of bills from his bag and put it into Peter's hand. Wow. Peter looked at this handful of banknotes worth at least thousands, with a happy smile on his face. This one belongs to you, doesn't it? Hey. Why didn't you stop him? He is still the middle-aged person in charge. He is lucky that Fat Hammer is still in the ICU, so no one has asked him for the 100,000 yuan that Luya took away. Hearing the other party's question, Peter curled his lips and said that classic sentence, "What does it have to do with me?" After that, Peter was too lazy to say any more. Listening to the noisy sounds outside the boxing ring, he hummed a tune and walked out of the boxing ring, leaving only the person in charge with a dark face. After 2 consecutive dereliction of duties, his days as a responsible person may be over. On the street, Peter clutched a handful of bills in his pocket. Although it was only 1,000, it was already a huge sum of money that he had never had since he was a child. Woohoo! Just when Peter was in a happy mood, a series of loud and rapid sirens brought his thoughts back to reality. Looking ahead, Peter saw a group of people gathered in a circle on the street, and police began to clear the place. Peter suddenly felt something in his heart. He quickly ran to the outside of the crowd, and relied on his strong physical fitness to squeeze in. Seeing the person lying on the ground, Luya's eyes shrank. Isn't this the masked man just now? At this time, the masked man looked extremely miserable. His body was broken into 2 parts, and there were burnt marks on the fracture. It looked like it had been cut directly by some high-heat weapon. Peter suddenly felt a wave of self-blame in his heart. If he had stopped him in the first place, maybe he wouldn't have ended up like this, right? Just as Peter was thinking this. Suddenly. Snap. A hand suddenly rested on Peter's shoulder. Who? Absent-mindedly, Peter turned around very quickly, and then he saw the figure behind him. Ben, Uncle Ben. Ben Parker kept walking along the street looking for his son and nephew. Finally, I saw my nephew Peter among the crowd. Peter, can you explain why you haven't come home so late tonight? Peter has changed a lot recently, and Ben can see it. At least, as a family member who has lived together for more than 10 years, it is impossible not to notice Peter's suddenly stronger body. Uncle Ben, I'm just out for a walk. Yes, just strolling around. Peter said just 3 times in a row before he came up with a lame excuse. Ben obviously didn't believe the explanation given by Peter, probably because Peter really couldn't lie. After taking a look at the body of the masked robbery man who was about to be wrapped, even Ben couldn't help but take a breath. He then looked at Peter with a stern look. Peter, tell me, you have nothing to do with this. Maybe there is some extraordinary ability in this world, and Ben Parker knows all too well how disastrous it will be for a young man to suddenly gain power beyond his control. He was very worried that if his nephew Peter gained any power, would he go astray because of it? Peter's hand in his pocket nervously squeezed the handful of bills. He didn't know whether he should tell Uncle Ben about this. But going to the boxing ring to do black boxing might be too unorthodox, so Peter hesitated again and again but didn't say anything. No, Uncle Ben, I just came to stroll on the street. Ben looked at his nephew's nervous look and knew that he was hiding something from him. But then he thought about it. Peter had been well-behaved and kind since he was a child, and he had no reason to doubt that Peter would do such a thing. Ben can be said to be a completely responsible and kind person, and he is willing to believe in his nephew. Okay, Peter, do you know where your brother is? Of course Peter didn't know that. In fact, even he didn't know that Luya would go out in the dark every night. Dad. At this time, Luya appeared on the other side of the road with his hands in his pockets and waved towards Ben. In fact, in order to prevent the tragedy in the original movie from happening, Luya has been paying attention to his father Ben with enhanced vision before 12 o'clock these 2 days. Especially the boxing ring, as expected, it really made him wait for that masked robber. At that time, Luya looked at the masked man whose father was only 1 street away, and the movement trajectories of both parties were already given in his mind. In the end, Luya came to the conclusion that if he didn't intervene, tragedy would definitely happen. Facing a guy who would threaten his family, especially his father in this life, Ben. Luya couldn't calm down immediately, and without much thought, he directly fired his laser eyes and sent the masked robber back to the west. Luya is not Peter, he never thinks he is a good person. Faced with this guy who might threaten his family, he just killed him without any burden in his heart. I just finished shopping with Gwen, what happened? Luya's face didn't turn red, and his heart didn't beat. He just made up a reason. Matching his calm face, he was surprisingly convincing. Gwen. I thought about it for a while. It seemed like a normal thing for a young man of this age to go on a date at night. After all, I was also a romantic figure when I was young. Therefore, Ben did not doubt his son, and just patted Luya on the shoulder. Son, your mother and I have no objection to your date, but you should tell us. Okay Dad, I understand. Well, now Luya can go out openly at night. Peter glanced at his brother with complicated eyes. Why is there such a big gap between people? I am shy even to say a word to Mary Jane, but my brother is already able to go shopping with Gwen every night. Luya glanced at his younger brother Peter, who had an envious expression on his face, and shook his head helplessly. You really believe it? Besides, even if I really went on a date with Gwen, would I go shopping all night? Episode 25. The Beginning of Chaos. Parallel Universe, Weirdo Universe. Streets of New York, Daily Bugle. Spider-Man has not appeared for a whole week. Due to the disappearance of Spider-Man in Queens, New York, the crime rate in the city has increased by 300%. Spider-Man, where are you? In today's latest Daily Bugle, there are actually 3 sections focusing on Spider-Man. Night falls on a dilapidated street. Spider-Man from the Strange Man universe has finally caught you. An extremely tall man walked out of the corner. He was wearing a combat uniform, and the exposed skin was an abnormal dark green color. Morlun, the totem killer, also known as the Spider-Man killer. In countless multi-universes, Morlun is hunting Spider-Man in their respective universes. In this Weird Man universe, Spider-Man's name is not Peter, but Pantheson. After Pantheson was bitten by the chosen spider, 8 spider legs sprouted from his back, so he was also called Spider-Man. However, at this time all 8 spider legs on Spider-Man's back had been broken, and a smelly green liquid flowed out from the fractures. Obviously, the disappearance of Spider-Man reported in the Daily Bugle was due to Morlun. Morlun, who possesses the ability to track, finally drove Spider-Man, or Spider-Man, to a dead end in this universe. At this time, Pantheson was speechless. In the process of escaping just now, the spider silk stored in his belly button was completely exhausted. Boo-hoo-hoo. Morlun's blood-red eyes stared at Pantheson, and then he raised his hands. Huge amounts of suction came from his hands. Then, Spider-Man Pantheon began to show a painful expression. In just a few seconds, when Morlun walked out of the street, Spider-Man had disappeared. All that was left were the hard shell fragments stained with green liquid on the ground. Very good, let me see which universe we will go to next. 741 Universe, Lock, Spider-Man. Just when Mo Luan was about to travel to Universe 741, a breath caught his attention. Are these 3 Spider-Men? Which universe is this from? No matter, after solving the problem 7311 universe, we will check again. The dark green figure disappeared, and the stranger universe lost Spider-Man forever. Chi universe. After receiving special approval from his father Ben, Luya gained the privilege of going out every night. In the past week, the name of the motherland has become more and more famous in Hell's Kitchen, even surpassing the South Block and being known by people in all blocks. At the same time, a large number of ordinary people knew about Ping An Street and poured into Ping An Street like a tide. Originally, Bray complained to Luya that too many people came, which made Ping An Street a bit crowded now. But Luya rejected his proposal to restrict ordinary people from staying in Ping An Street, because he seemed to have discovered another secret that increases the unlocking level of the template for the motherland. Unlocking degree of motherland template 71%. A week ago, the unlocking rate was still 50%, but a week later, it has reached a full 71%. The secret of this, Luya guessed, is because of the worship of passers-by. Apart from killing people, the people of our country like to show their holiness in front of everyone and gain fame. But it is true that Ping An Street cannot accommodate so many people. After all, this is really a street. Not necessarily. Luya spent a day personally taking action and specifically laying down the 3 surrounding streets. As a result, Ping An Street occupies nearly half of the southern block of Hell's Kitchen. As for the gang bosses who were originally entrenched here, they have basically become the foundation for street renovation. Just like that, a month has passed. During this month, some minor things happened around me. The first is Luya, whose unlocking degree of the motherland template has reached 80%. However, after reaching 80%, the growth of unlocking degree becomes slower and slower. Other aspects. In Queens, New York, the crime rate has suddenly increased, and many people have disappeared inexplicably. However, there is a large population here and the society is not stable, so the disappearance of a few people does not attract attention. Then, 2 Spider-Man turned out. One of the Spider-Man is wearing a red spider suit, while the other is wearing a black and white suit. To distinguish them, based on their characteristics, people call them Spider-Man and Spider-Woman, respectively. The existence of 2 Spider-Man has greatly reduced the crime rate in Queens. However, disappearances still happen frequently, and the missing people begin to change from old people to young people. Police station. Director George Stacy looked at his subordinates' reports and had a headache. The 5th person has reported the crime today. Hell's Kitchen, Ping An Street, Ping An Restaurant. What's going on? Didn't I say that you can keep peace on Ping An Street? Why has my brother been missing here for so long and you still haven't found the murderer? At the door of the restaurant, a slovenly middle-aged black man sat on the doorframe like a scoundrel, loudly accusing the management of Ping An Street for their inaction. The now renovated restaurant is at least 10 times the size it once was. File size. Looking at the noisy slovenly black man at the door, now the manager of the restaurant, Bray walked out. I'm already investigating your brother's affairs, and I will definitely let you know if there is any news. However, the sloppy black man didn't buy it and continued to behave like a rogue. Enough. Suddenly, a girl wearing training clothes walked out from the backyard of the restaurant and yelled loudly. The girl was Lu Xian. After that day, she asked to be apprenticed to Erica and learn her fighting and assassination skills. In more than a month, she has changed a lot. As for Ping An Street, she has regarded it as her real home, her personality is much more cheerful than before, and she is willing to talk more. And her younger brother, Lu Hao, was also sent to study with a teacher in preparation for obtaining an identity and going to school in the future. At the door, seeing a half-grown girl like Lucian dare to attack him in public, the sloppy black man suddenly felt insulted. None of your business. Ping and Street said it would ensure everyone's safety, that's why we came. Otherwise, why would everyone come here? Everyone said it, right? Dirty black people try to incite others to gain momentum. A slight commotion began among the onlookers. Lucian looked at the opponent with a victorious smile and wanted to rush forward and beat him up. However, she was worried about affecting the image of Ping and Street, so she hesitated in place. Let's see. Maybe, the recent disappearances are the so-called ghosts on Ping and Street. They tricked us in, maybe for some unknown purpose. As soon as this sentence came out, everyone's discussion became louder. Although most people do not agree with this view and feel that Ping and Street is indeed a rare piece of pure land in Hell's Kitchen, few people agree. Just when the sloppy black man was feeling proud, a figure fell from the sky. Boom. Ping and Street welcomes everyone, the only thing you need to pay is your respect. If you were like him. Saying that, Luya stepped on the sloppy black man's foot and twisted it hard. Click. Then don't blame me for being rude. Episode 26, Unlock Flying. Looking at the sloppy black man wailing in pain at his feet, Luya felt angry in his heart. Why are some people just not satisfied? If it weren't for their own Ping and Street, they would still be living a precarious life every day. Sure enough, love and hatred will never go out of style. I am still too kind. Looking at the silent crowd, Luya said in a deep voice, if you want to continue living on my Ping and Street, you must abide by the rules. From today on, everyone living on Ping and Street must have his or her own job. You respect me, and I will give you protection. Luya said, raising his hands high, his body slowly floated from the ground. This is the last ability that his motherland template obtained after being over 80 years old, flying. Although the lore has only initially unlocked ability, it is not yet able to fly at high speeds. But at this moment, his floating figure looked like a god to everyone. Hell's Kitchen is a place that respects the strong, where the weak eat the strong, and only the strong can be respected. And Luya has undoubtedly left a deep mark on everyone's hearts. At this time, no one paid attention to the sloppy black man just now, but looked feverishly at the lore floating in the air. Their eyes were as if they were staring at gods. Mom, is he a messenger of God? In the arms of a mother, the little girl looked at the lore with bright eyes. From the stories she had heard, it seemed that only God's messengers had the ability to fly. Maybe he is sent by God to protect everyone. In fact, the little girl's mother was also extremely shocked at this moment. She had never believed in religion, but after returning home today, she suddenly began to believe in gods. Oh my God, Bray could barely keep his body steady. My boss can actually fly? What is going on? Is the boss really a god? Doesn't that mean that he is the god's younger brother? Rounding things off, I am also a god. Of course, Bray didn't know how to round, but that's what it meant. He looked back at Ping and Restaurant. There were 2 strings of huge amounts of red lanterns hanging on the door, which Lu Xian bought specially in China Street. And I am no longer the B****************** D who lived a miserable life. Tears shone in the corners of Bray's eyes. Was he really alive before? No, just a zombie. And now, I am the manager of Ping and Restaurant. He is a decent person. So, if anyone wants to destroy Ping and Restaurant and Ping and Street, he must destroy himself. Bray's eyes became firm, he looked at Luya feverishly, and then shouted to the people around him, have you forgotten who gave you asylum? Have you forgotten who rescued you from the darkness? Faced with Bray's hysteria, some people in the crowd finally began to respond. He is a native of the motherland. People of the motherland. Everyone shouted the name of the motherland loudly. Although the residents of Hell's Kitchen are like mice, most of them still have the ability to distinguish right from wrong. Who is good and who is bad? They are not blind. The shouts of hundreds of people were very shocking, and the entire Ping and Street was boiling with the sight of Luya. With the support of everyone on Ping and Street, Luya's reputation has reached its peak in the neighborhood. Unlocking degree of Motherland template increased by 5%. Unlocking degree of Motherland template 85%. In Luya's mind, the system's voice sounded. This time, the unlocking level increased by a full 5%. Seeing everyone's increasingly fanatical eyes, Luya glanced at Bray in surprise. I didn't expect that this guy actually has such a talent for inciting emotions. Hungry, so hungry. Thompson is like a frail ghost, wandering around Hell's Kitchen. Good brother, let's go eat quickly. On his shoulder, suddenly a huge amount of head popped out. 2 heads appear on one body. If it were a normal person, he would have been stunned by the shock. However, Thompson seemed not surprised. He just glanced at the black head and turned his head away. In fact, he is currently having a fierce battle between heaven and man in his heart. The weakness of the venom also affected him. Possessed by the venom, he felt as if his stomach was burning with hunger. However, the food that this guy named Venom in the body refers to is the human brain. Of course, in fact, some other living creatures or chocolate can also help the symbiote maintain its physical strength, but the symbiote's desire for human brains is the greatest. This is simply unacceptable to Thompson. Just before he was about to attack an innocent passerby, the spider strength that had disappeared from his body suddenly reacted, causing him to stop at the brink. Although he is AB***************, D, eating people is something that normal humans can do? When Thompson first gained the power of the symbiote, he was quite happy, thinking that he could return to his peak after losing spider strength. But now he just wants to escape from Venom's control. As everyone knows, Venom is also quite depressed at this time. After following Thompson for so long, I have never had a full meal. Every time he wanted to attack passersby, Thompson would come out to stop him. You know, although the symbiont can control the host's behavior to a certain extent. But correspondingly, the host can also restrict the symbiote. Especially recently, for some reason, Venom has felt the presence of similar people in Queens, New York. And that same kind is already blatantly hunting humans. In order not to be implicated, the Venom rarely appears from Thompson's body now. The current situation is that the Venom is tasteless to Thompson, so it would be a pity to abandon it. He wants to give up Thompson, who looks like a villain but is actually a coward. However, the spider strength hidden in Thompson's body made him reluctant to let go. Suddenly, Venom's instinctive perception made it feel that there was an unusual aura nearby. That's it, it's near us. Venoms can devour each other. Rather than eating, the venom possessing Thompson just wants to stay away from its stronger counterpart. 1 kilometer away from them, a strong man stood in front of an elderly couple with a ferocious smile on his face. The husband of the elderly couple blocked his wife behind him and took out a handful of scattered banknotes and coins from his pocket. "We only have this much money in total, and we will give it all to you. Please let us go. The survival rule of Hell's Kitchen is this: waste money and eliminate disaster." However, the two old men did not know that the situation they faced this time was completely different from before. Episode 27, Appearance. The two old men didn't know that standing in front of them was Hell's Kitchen's notorious killer, Bullseye. What frightened the two old men even more was that right in front of them, the body of this strong man suddenly swelled. In just the blink of an eye, Bullseye's body was wrapped in a layer of huge amounts of scarlet liquid. Symbiote poisonous. Venom and the venom on Thompson came to Earth together, and chose the ruthless Bullseye as their host. Most of the recent disappearances in Queens are also at their hands. At this time, Fierce Poison's whole body was blood red. Something must have happened. Mingdu looked at the two old men in front of him, his pale eyes showing a look of disgust. "Hey, didn't you say you want to eat younger people in the future?" Inside his body, Bullseye's voice came. "Just make do with it, there are a lot of people here anyway." After hearing the conversation between Poison and Bullseye, the two old men also realized the seriousness of the matter. "Run." The husband immediately took a few steps forward. The man's responsibility made him shout to his wife without looking back, "Go to Pingan Street and run quickly." The old man didn't know how long he could delay his wife with his old body, but this was all he felt he could do for his wife in the end. A huge, scarlet tongue protruded from his pale teeth. Fiercely looked at the two old men who were blocking him and the other running away tremblingly, with a disdainful smile on his face. He grabbed the old man, and just when he was about to open his mouth, he was stunned by a sudden sensation a kilometer away. That's it. It's the same kind of person. As long as you eat it, it is worth thousands of humans. Mingdu's body was shaking with excitement. He glanced with disgust at the old man who was holding his hands with his eyes closed and preparing to die, and then threw him away with a fierce force of poison. With a bang sound, the old man fell into a pile of garbage next to him. "Edmund, how are you?" Suddenly, the old man's wife ran out from the side and reached out to help the old man. She didn't run far. She was already too old. Pingan Street was at least a kilometer away from here. How could you possibly run away? Why haven't you run away yet? Seeing that his wife had not escaped, the old man blamed her, but at the same time, he felt warm in his heart. Just looking at the scarlet monster who suddenly let him go, he didn't understand why the other party suddenly let him go. At this time, the venom possessing Thompson also understood the danger of his situation. The induction between venoms is mutual. If you can sense the other, it means that the other person has also sensed you. Suffer it. Now that I have never had a decent meal with Thompson, how can I be his opponent? However, it is obviously too late to escape. Boom. With the sound of the wall collapsing under impact, a scarlet venom was already close at hand. "My good brother. I finally found you." Due to a month of eating, poison is much larger than venom. Under normal circumstances, it is almost twice the size of venom. File size. Oh my god, your brother is so much stronger than you? Thompson looked at Fido with some dumbfounded eyes, and then looked down at his thin self. He couldn't help but wonder, could the symbiote race also be said to be stunted? Venom could feel Thompson's thoughts and shouted angrily, isn't it because of you? If you hadn't kept me from eating, would I have become so weak? Thompson curled his lips and muttered, I didn't eat a lot of chocolate for you. Can that thing be used as food? Having said this, Venom became even more angry. Okay, do we have any escape plan now? Thompson looked at Venom expectantly. Although this guy is evil and always thinks about the human brain, he really has a way when he is in danger. However, this time Venom replied feebly, it's too late. Base. The poisonous arms directly turned into 2 huge amounts of spikes. Good brother, please become my nourishment. Bliss. Mingdu looked at the weak Venom as if he was seeing the most delicious food in the world. As soon as he finished speaking, huge amounts of spikes pierced Thompson's chest. As long as the host is eliminated, Venom's strength will be greatly reduced. At this time, with the weakness of Thompson and Venom, it was impossible to escape the attack of the sting. Just when Thompson was about to be disemboweled, fortunately, the Venom completed its possession instantly. The spike penetrated the Venom and brought up a black droplet. It's just that although the Venom possession saved Thompson's life, it also made the Venom even weaker. I'm so unlucky. Venom thought sadly as his consciousness gradually weakened. Are you going to die here? Thompson murmured to himself that he had also imagined what it would be like to face death. However, when death is coming, I feel unexpectedly calm. Hey, you have such a powerful body, but you don't cherish it. No wonder you are so weak. At this time, Mingdu also felt something unusual in Thompson's body, which was possessed by Venom. If that power can be fully developed, it will definitely not be weaker than myself. Having such a host, but not eating to improve himself, is incredible to Mingdu. Hey, hurry up and eat him, why are you lingering? Inside his body, Bullseye felt the poison coveting Thompson's body and couldn't help but urge. He knew that this guy had no humanity at all. If the other party chose someone else as a host, he would be in danger. Shut up. Mingdu didn't have any respect for the bullseye in his body, and directly shouted loudly, you are just a carrier for me, figure out your position. As he said that, he didn't care about Bullseye's face turning dark, and directly tempted Thompson and said, boy, why don't you follow me? As long as you follow me, I will spare your life. However, Thompson did not wait for an answer. A figure fell from the sky. Luya's hearing has become very powerful due to the highly unlocked template of the motherland. When the 2 old men said ping and street before, they were heard by Luya, who was not yet proficient in listening to information. Therefore, in just 2 seconds, he crossed a distance of more than a kilometer and came to the 2 Venoms. And it wasn't until he finished speaking that a sonic boom sounded behind him. Supersonic? The 2 huge amounts of fierce poison's white eyes suddenly shrank. Generally speaking, speed and power are linked. Able to move at a speed far exceeding the speed of sound, the guy in front of me is probably quite extraordinary. Luya looked at the 2 symbiotes, one black and one red, with interest. Of course he knew about symbiotes, but he didn't expect to see 2 at once. And using supervision, Luya could see that the person inside the black venom was none other than Thompson. He made a judgment after just a moment's thought. Obviously, although Thompson became the venom host, he had not eaten, otherwise it would not be so weak. Instead, it's the red guy in front of me, I said, what are you doing in my territory? Luya's voice turned cold. Episode 28, Strengthening Potion. Luya observed this guy with a scarlet body. It looks a lot like the red symbiote Slaughter in the Venom movie, and is more than twice as strong as the venom on Thompson. Wow, perfect body. Looking at the Luya falling from the sky, instead of being afraid, Fido showed an even more coveted look in his eyes. Compared to your steel-like body, my current body is no different than that of a baby. After falling in love with Thompson's body, Fido discovered that humans can always give him endless surprises. It can see that Luya's body is definitely stronger than ordinary 100 refined steel. Is this still a physique that humans can possess? If you combine with such a body to form a symbiosis, it will be more than just a small Earth. I'm afraid they can have a place in the entire universe. Mingdu was extremely excited at this time, looking at Luya as if he were looking at a peerless treasure. The symbiote and the host can share thoughts, so Bullseye also knows at this time that Venom has once again abandoned himself and changed his host. No. You can't do this. Bullseye roared crazily, we agreed that we would conquer the world together in the future, have you forgotten? After a month of getting along with each other, Bullseye is very aware of fierce temperament. Strictly speaking, fierce poison is simply a ruthless and cold-killing machine. As long as he chooses to change the host, he will never let go of such a good meat like himself. Bullseye knows very well that when Fido gives up on himself, it will be his own death. I still have such a lofty dream that has not been realized. How could I die here? It turns out that since the combination of Bullseye and Venom a month ago, the desires in his heart have continued to expand. And his first dream is to replace Gene Ben and become the Underworld Emperor of America. In order to realize this dream, he even agreed to Fido's request and kept killing humans to become stronger. How could you want to kick me away after taking advantage of me? Bullseye no longer hesitated, and while the poison was still possessed by him, he mobilized all the muscle strength in his body and directly released all the energy of the poison. As long as you kill these annoying guys in front of you, no one can compete with you for the poison. In fact, Bullseye is actually more powerful than Venom imagined. As the chief assassin of New York's underground emperor Kingpin, Bullseye originally possessed strength far beyond ordinary people. Top fighter, multi-weapon master, concealed weapon throwing master, these are his titles. Not to mention, some of the bones in his body were even injected with adamantium. Therefore, facing Bullseye's sudden attack, fierce poison didn't react for a moment, and his body was really successfully manipulated by Bullseye. In 1 second, Fido's body expanded rapidly and turned into a monster nearly 5 meters tall. Huge amounts of bodies directly burst the buildings on both sides of the street, and many people screamed and ran for their lives from the collapsed houses. Cole, what do you want to do? Fierce's voice was a little angry. Of course it doesn't care about the life and death of humans, but it can't be tolerated by the host taking control of the body. Get out of my way. Just when the poison was controlling the body and pushing Bullseye out of the body, a reagent filled with green liquid appeared in Bullseye's hand. Human body strengthening medicine that the Osborn group will soon supply to the partner military. It's just that this medicine is still in the research and development stage, and it still has considerable side effects, such as causing schizophrenia in users. Logically speaking, it is impossible for this kind of medicine to be circulated among the people, but with Kingpin as a backer, it seems that it is not unusual to get samples in the hands of the military. You forced me to do this. Bullseye poured all the green potion into his mouth before the poison was squeezed out of his body. No matter how big the side effects of the human strengthening potion are, its effect is quite good. As the medicine entered Bullseye's throat, the muscles in his body began to swell. Veins popped up on his body surface. If you look carefully, you can see that there is a liquid flowing with a strange light inside them. Human strengthening potion can strengthen various functions of the human body, and can strengthen it by at least 8 times. Woo-woo. Bullseye and Venom wailed at the same time. At this moment, Bullseye, who had achieved far more Superman-like qualities, finally took control of the symbiote's dominance. In other words, poison has become Bullseye's vassal at this time, and can no longer leave Bullseye's body on its own. Amidst the fierce and painful wails, its scarlet skin also began to change color, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a dark green monster. Like exposed skinless muscles, viscous liquid splashes on the surface and is absorbed back again. The poison at this time is indeed a bit like its name, it looks extremely poisonous. Hiss. Bullseye took a breath of air and then opened his eyes. At this time, the last trace of rationality in his eyes disappeared, replaced by complete madness. Bullseye, no, maybe at this time, it would be more appropriate to call him Crazy Eyes. After taking the incomplete human body strengthening potion, Crazy Eyes has completely lost his normal human personality and become a complete mental monster. At the same time, its body is completely integrated with the poison and can no longer be separated. Hee hee, I'll eat you.